Okay, welcome to my presentation on Paradise Lost, from gods to demons, ancient Near East deities in Paradise Lost. So while reading Paradise Lost, I had two questions on book one. In book one, he goes into this very long description of Satan's allies and minions. He does this kind of Homeric, falling asleep at the keyboard thing, where he just goes on and on and on about these demons and where they come from and their exploits and all of this. I mean, it's like a big chunk of book one. So my two questions on that were, first of all, where is all this detailed knowledge of his coming from? And second of all, why is he doing this? Obviously, he's not doing it just to sort of flex his knowledge of the topic. He's trying to accomplish something here. So the question is, what? So first, I'm going to look at which of them he names and which ones we'll be focusing on with this presentation. Give a little bit of the actual biblical context for each one, how they originally appear, and then we'll talk about how they appear in Paradise Lost, how he transforms them, and why. So the ones that appear in Paradise Lost here are listed as they appear in the Bible. First of all, the first to sort of speak of Satan's cohorts is Beelzebub. In the Bible, he's sometimes called Baal Zevuv. He's a Philistine god who traditionally is associated as this with the flies. He's the lord of the flies, although that's probably a mistranslation or a purposeful corruption of his name. Next is Molech, an Ammonite god associated with child sacrifice. Although whether he was an actual god or Molech is a name of a type of sacrifice is unclear. We'll see further on either way that Molech or Moloch is also represented in the Greek myth he's a sort of version of Kronos, the Titan. Next is Chemosh or Chemosh, a Moabite god who was introduced by the wives of King Solomon. In a sort of negative context, it's a sort of critique on Solomon introducing all these foreign wives and the things they bring with them. Then we have Peor or Baal Peor, who also was introduced by Moabite women and tempted the Israelites to sin in the Sinai desert. Then we have Ashtoreth, the first of the female goddesses, who's a Phoenician goddess associated with fertility and sexuality in the Bible. We have Tammuz, a Mesopotamian fertility goddess who is ironically mourned by women in the book of Ezekiel. Again, we see that these foreign gods really tempt people to sin and to stray. So there, the fact that the women actually mourn the loss of this idol is a way of emphasizing the level of sin that the people have reached. Then the fan favorite Dagon, who is traditionally depicted as a fish god, but really originally was probably a god of harvest. Dagon is the word for grain in the Bible. And then finally, and relatively minorly, but I think it's still important to mention, is Rimmon, a Syrian storm god of thunder. We lost the mic. So the last is Rimmon, a Syrian storm god who appears here and there in the Bible, again as a figure tempting people away from God and living away from sin. So these are as they appear in the Bible, but in Paradise Lost, they appear a little bit differently. So first of all, the first big change is that they're no longer gods. They're all demons under Satan. Right? Beelzebub is Satan's second in command. He supported him in the war on heaven. Then we have Moloch, who is very vividly described, as we'll see in a little bit, as this horrid king smeared with the blood of child sacrifice who really pushes Satan to get back to war. Milton actually combines Chemosh or Chemos and Peor, and he describes them both as these corrupting influences on the Israelites. He actually gets something very right with these names of Ashtaroth, Astoreth, Astarte, where there's these variations that appear in the Bible of, again, they're goddesses. Here he has them as these multiple female demons or demons who can change between male and female, who tempted King Solomon into sin. Then we have Tammuz, a Syrian demon, also who tempted the women in Lebanon and Zion. And then here he is, Dagon, this grotesque half-fish god. Again, there's this incredible description of him from Palestine, worshipped by the Philistines. And then Rimmon, right, another Syrian demon who also is known for corrupting Israelite kings. So the names largely stay the same. He just sort of anglicizes them from the Bible. They're given a little bit more personality, I would say. But there are some other changes as well, right? So here we have this really great piece of artwork just to sum up what's going on with those gods, this offering to Molech. And what we see is, like described in Paradise Lost and of course in the Bible, what are presumably the Israelites. They're actually dressed in these priestly garb and they're blowing these holy trumpets and people are bowing, except that they've been corrupted into child sacrifice instead of properly worshiping God. And this is something that Milton really sort of focuses in on and brings out. So we'll talk about that in a second. And coming back to my original questions, how did Milton know all of this? So in these passages, he first of all demonstrates a really deep reading of the Bible. He doesn't leave anything out. I actually want to look at here the description of Moloch and then of Dagon, where Moloch is, yes, he's this terrible demonic thing, but look at how Milton has clearly basically memorized the Bible, right? Who worships Moloch? The Ammonite. And where? In Rabbah on the plain. He talks about the geography in Argov and in Bashan to these rivers, the stream of Arnon, meaning it's more than just this bullet point list of who's serving with Satan. There's a very clear identity that's given to each of these. Or with Dagon, right? So he gives you this whole backstory of Dagon, mourned in earnest, the captive ark, the famous story from Judges, his statue in a bunch of different stories gets destroyed, this sea monster, an upward man and downward fish, and reared in Azotus, the biblical Hebrew Azata, people who go to Gaza, in Palestine, Gat and Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gaza. He paints this very clear picture, although we also see his lack of real historical sources. I doubt that Milton ever actually saw an idol of Dagon, because here he portrays this sort of misconception, not supported by historical or archaeological evidence, of Dagon as a fish god, which we know today not to be true. So coming back to his source, his main source is probably, or really obviously, the Bible and those translations that we discussed in class, the importance of them. So mostly the Bible, right? But we also know that Milton was very well read in the classical sources, and the beauty of what he does is he takes this deep, deep reading of the Bible and blends in everything else that he has read. So I want to take a look at one Roman source, which he was definitely familiar with, and I don't know if he directly references, but clearly influenced his way of thinking and his way of looking at things. So if we look here, early on we mentioned that the Greek equivalent of Moloch is Kronos, the Titan, the father of the gods, who famously ate his children. And so again, that child sacrifice, eating children, here by Plutarch in De Superstitione, heavily demonizes and critiques that type of worship. And it's interesting, I don't know if this is the first case, but it's an early case of taking what may have once been a sort of, quote, valid type of worship and sacrifice, which then later is written off as not divine, as blasphemous, as demonic. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's a lot of language of perversion and transformation of the holy order, which Milton does here too. He sort of takes his cue from Plutarch, where Plutarch takes what was some form of worship and says, no, this is not divine. This is not even a god or anything. This is not something to be worshipped. Is what then Milton does to those ancient deities, ancient gods, which in the Bible were sort of validly, or not really validly, but acceptably at times worshipped and followed. And there it's this sort of competition between the Hebrew God and these other Moloch and Dagon and Rimmon and Tammuz, who people again and again go after them and follow them. Now, what Milton does here is he takes those things which, to him it's unacceptable. You cannot allow them to be a competition to God, and he places them into a hierarchy, right? We talked about these Renaissance hierarchies, these orders of the world, and here it's very clear, right? Satan is beneath God, and he rebels against God and is cast down, and then united beneath Satan, Milton takes these transformed gods, which are now no longer equals and competitors of God. Again, that can't be. And he turns them into these very unique, right? He names them, he places them, and he very intentionally places them beneath Satan as a way of tying everything together, right? Milton was this sort of great, weaver of legends, bringing it all together, placing them in their spot, below Satan, below God, and also, very importantly, he doesn't take away their teeth. He doesn't make them dangerous. He makes them not dangerous to God anymore. That can't be, but he makes you very aware of how they are dangerous to people, how they still, to this day, tempt us to sin, and how, we can be like those ancient Israelites who were tempted away. We got to be careful not to fall to their influence if we want to remain good Christians. So, to conclude, what Milton does is he takes what he was intimately familiar with, the Bible, and what he was also well read in, the classical sources, and uses those to transform the Bible, which was, always was important, but in his time was becoming more important than ever, and transform aspects of it, those foreign gods, which were totally unacceptable and unpalatable, into something acceptable and palatable that have their place in his world and in his church. That's all. Thank you very much.